Alright, we got 5 sections to read. Alright, section 11, fuel system. Contents, description, fuel injector, description, installation time, injector sticking injector servicing injector test stand, setting up test stand, checking up operation test stand, test preparation, holding pressure and leak test. Rack freeness test, binding plunger test, replacing filter, storage, injector leakage, description, checking, setting racks, fuel filter, description, maintenance, service data, specifications, equipment list. Our electric motor division GM, section 11, 8, 12, 16, and 20 cylinder engine maintenance manual, fuel system description. The engine fuel system in Figure 11.1 consists of the fuel injector with the engine mounted fuel filter and fuel supply with the return manifold components external through the engine, such as the motor with the fuel-driven fuel pump, the fuel tank, the fuel suction strainer, the contents lineup, connecting lines completing the fuel system, and in operation fuel from the fuel tank is drawn up and by with the fuel pump through a sectional strainer is delivered to the engine mounted filter, and then passes through the filter elements with the fuel manifold supply line and injector inlet filter to each cylinder to the injector. As a small portion of fuel is supplied to each of the injector is pumped into the cylinder very high pressure through the needle valve and the spray tip of the injector. The quantity of the fuel injected depends upon the rotative position of the plunger as set with the injector jack and the governor. The excessive fuel note that you use by the injector flow for the injector servicing, the lubricate and the cool, the warning or working part. The fuel leave the injector through the return fuel filter. The filter protects the injector for the event of the backward fuel flow of the fuel into the injector from the return fuel line from the return fuel filter in the injector. The excess fuel passes through the fuel return line and the manifold of the relief valve inlet to the return fuel side glass on the engine mounted fuel filter. This valve restricts the returning fuel, maintain a back pressure on the injector. The fuel continues into the return fuel side glass, filling the glass down to the standby pipe under the glass through the return line to the fuel supply tank. Figure 11.11 shows the typical fuel system. Alright, you have your injector, fuel supply line, fuel return line, injector filters, return side glass, bypass side glass, fuel return line, fuel filters. Alright, description. The injector figure 11.2 is located with the sheet with the taper with the hole with the key with the center of each of the cylinder head with the spray with the protruding slightly below the bottom of the head is the position with the head with the dial with the held in place with the injector crab nut with the external working parts for the injector lubricated with the oil end of the injector rocker arm adjusted and screw. The internal working parts are lubricated and cooled by the flow of fuel oil for the pass oil through the injector. A cross-section unit injector name for the various parts shown in figure 11.3. 11.2 shows the fuel injector. Okay. The plunger is given the constant stroke with a reciprocating motion, but the injector can actuate through the rocker arm of the plunger file with the timing injector period during the plunger stroke, which is set by the adjusting screw at the end of the rocker arm. The figure 11.4 show the flow of the fuel through the injector during one of the downward stroke with the rotation with the plunger main with the rack with the gear with control of the quantity of the fuel injected into the cylinder during each of the stroke. The rack position is controlled by the governor through the injector control lever. Linkage the gear is keyed to it and sliding fit on the plunger to allow the plunger vertical movement. Alright, from the left, fuel spring, fuel line, fuel connection, fuel filter cap, fuel filter spring, gasket filter, rack, plug, locating dial, indication, grooves, nut split detector, valve spring cage, valve spring seat. Alright, orifice from the bottom on the right, up. Orifice spray, needle valve, check valve, cage, check valve, spacer, bushing, plunger, guide pin, gear retainer, seal, gear body, stopping, pin, spring, retainer, stop pin, follower. That's figure 11.3, fuel injector cross section. Alright, figure 11.4 shows the injector fuel flow, top stroke, both parts open with the emit fuel, bypass point, the fuel plunger escape through the upper port with no effective stroke. Injector starts, both parts are closed, forcing the fuel into the cylinder. Injector end, lower part starts with the opening of the allowing the fuel below the plunger to escape. And bottom stroke, the lower part of the fully open, no effect of the stroke. Helical near the bottom of the plunger controller, opening and closing with the both of the fuel fuel ports of the plunger bushing. Rotating the plunger regulates for the time of the both parts are closed during the downward stroke with the quantity of the fuel injected into the cylinder as shown in figure 11.5. As the plunger is rotated with the idle position, fuel load position, the pumping part of the stroke with its length and the injection is started earlier. More fuel is injected. Proper atomization of the fuel is accomplished by the fuel high pressure created during the downstroke of the plunger, which forces the fuel path of the needle valve out through the spray holes in the tip of the injector. The injectors have been adjusted calibrating side with the mounted on the side of the injector body adjacent to the rack. The sliding incorporated with the solely means the adjusting injector output with the calibrating stand. Filters in the fuel inlet and outlet connections protect the working parts of the injector. Our figure 11.5 shows the quantity of the fuel injection controlled by rotating plunger with a rack. Upper part, port, lower port, no injection rack, clear out, no injection rack, at 88,000th of an inch. Idle, effective stroke, half load, effective stroke, and full load, effective stroke. Maintenance, installation. When installing the injector for the engine, make sure that it's correct injector for the engine which is applied. Seal the injector body and tapered hole with the cylinder head of the clean. Install the injector, apply the injector crab, cylindrical washer and nut with the torque nut at 55 pounds of torque, and check the injector rack with the level of assembly. Install the tightening fuel supply return line with the injector engine manifold. Install the rocker arm shaft and rocker arms. Loosen the injector rocker arm lock nut the back off the adjusting screw before the tightening the rocker arm shaft nuts. The injector is now ready for the timing. Timing the injector. The injector installed, making the time and adjusting of the valve. Note that the injector cannot be timed if the overspeed has been tripped. It must be first reset with the engine crankshaft buried over the at least one revolution. Set the flywheel at 0 degrees top dead center over the cylinder being timed. Insert the injector timing gauge into the hole provided the injector body 11.6. Loosen the lock nut. Turn on the rocker arm. Adjusting screw until the shoulder over the gauge is just passed over the injector follower guide. Turn the adjusting screw lock nut while holding the adjusting screw in position with the screwdriver. Recheck the setting. Figure 11 shakes over the timer, injector timing gauge, and the rocker arm adjusting screw. Sticking injectors. Engines may encounter the sticking injectors due to fuel loop, oil filter, maintenance conditions. Since these conditions vary often, monetary injector removal may be minimized utilizing alcohol-free with the up of the injectors were installed. This is done by applying ordinary commercial methanol to the injectors through the hole opposite with the tightening of the tool hole popping with the injector with motoring of the engine. The sticking condition can usually cause the injector, which are held with the plunger down with the engine stopped. Should the injector rack show signs of sticking, they should be checked with the pergament or varnish deposits. If the present with the rack should be cleaned with alcohol and rechecked. If sticking persisted, the injector should be removed and replaced. Operational injector. If no case for the injectors be crushed out or cut out, and the engine operated. If the injector is operating within the factory, cannot be remedied. Replaced. The engine should be shut down until corrective action has been taken. Service injector. The servicing injector cleaning and work with the conditions must be maintained. Dust, dirt, with any of the form of the frequent cause of the injector failure. When the injector is in the engine, with the protected against dirt and dust, other foreign materials with various filters employed with the injector storage and protected against the harmful material with the filter sealing by with the opening of the return project protected shipping blocks. However, any entirely different set of conditions encountered when it becomes necessary to disassemble the injector for the repair or overhaul the conditions necessity of the shop maintenance, special shops, equipment, trained personnel is recommended for that non-operational injectors be returned to electric motive for the rebuild and unit until exchange. Unit exchange. Alright, injector testing stand. In order to sufficient efficient engine performance, injectors should be tested whenever the removal from the engine, but regardless of the reason for the removal, it is advisable to test for the complete engine set during each of the annual inspection. It is recommended that the injectors be tested with the same oil used for protection against the rust as given in storing injectors. It is important all individuals doing the test to understand the basic principle of injector operation testing procedure in order to prevent the acceptance of the defective injectors and rejection with good ones. Inspectors use the injector test stand and outline each separate test procedures along with a basic explanation for the operation files. The instructions cover the testing of all the needle valve instructions. Use the test shown in figure 11.7. The procedures are not applicable to the other types of tests. 11 shows the injector test stand, test stands, pump lever, the pressure shutoff valve, the injector pumping lever, and clamping wrench. Equipment on the sense of the injector leak off the rates were very great in the portion of the volume fume contained in the high pressure portion of the test stand. Or setting up the test stand. Basically, the stand consists of the fuel reserve of the filter, high pressure pump with the pressure gauge, with the necessary for the connecting line, with the fitting of the supply of the fuel and the injector. Understand with the test stand should be set up with the instruction with the manufacturer inspection carefully with the dirt and foreign material with the tank lines filled on the tank with a clean fuel. Operate with the pump with the purge all free air with the system. Investigate how shown with the viscosity of the fuel and oil is tested with the same with the marked ineffective with the test and resolve with the regular fuel. Oil may be provided with viscosity not less than 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Do not reuse fuel oil which has been pumped through the injectors into a plastic bowl. Check the test stand. Installing the test block and plate for the injector with the stand and pump with the pressure at 2,000 psi with the indicator with a gauge of 5 minutes. The pressure should not be dropped to below 1975 psi. Release the block and recheck for 500 psi and 1,000 psi. The pressure should hold 1 minute with no apparent gauge drop. Make the test with the pressure shutoff valve with the figure 1107 open all the way, and the test of the satisfactory injector may be made using the shutoff valve to proceed with the test indicated leaking. When the stand, repeat the test with using the shutoff valve before timing the leak off rates. If the tests are satisfactory with the shutoff valve closed, it is necessary to use the shutoff valve when making the injector holding pressure test. When placing the next new stand over the operation over the removal of the replacing gauge fuel tank with the filter pumping any of the reason test block should be installed with the pressure rated at 2,500 psi, vented at least 6 times before making the operational check. Test stand operation: the operator must consider the test stand as an instrument rather than a tool. Every effort should be made to make the manual operation repeated test. Same following general information is provided to obtain the uniform operation. 1. General. When operating the pump, use the 40 stroke per minute to provide the fuel rate. Operating with the check valve smoothly to circulate the fuel with the injector. When using the popping lever, do not use the force use such force to damage either the injector or the lever. Do not permit the lever to fly up freely. In making a holding test, do not pump the stand above the 2,500 psi. Test the stands regularly, and this should be checked for the daily leaks or test blocks. Fuel oil used for testing should not be reused. Injector test preparation. Install the injector in the test stand. Filter the injector with the fuel oil, but do not connect the fuel line from the pump to the injector at the time. Set the injector rack maximum fuel output position, minimum rack length. Pop the injector with the popping lever, figure 11.7, using approximately 40 smoothing even strokes per minute. A finely atomized spray with it should be each for the hole within the tip of the rapid closing. Needle valve should be produced as a sharper shatter. Even if the valve of the valve is open without producing the finely atomized spray with the valve seat without producing a sharp shatter, make sure the very rapid stroke of the lever dislodge any form of the material with the valve seat. If the needle valve still fails to function properly, the stuck needle of dirt over the valve seat with the defective valve seat may be the cause. Alright, holding pressure on the leak test. All injectors lose pressure during to leakage. Any of the several points of the leakage must be controlled during the injector manufacture to prevent the engine from lube oil dilution. The holding of the pressure will qualify the injectors having the specified leak off the rates, but provided with the leakage is properly prevented with the satisfactory controlled. 2. Manually hold the test of the sand fuel line block on the injector pump until the fuel is discharged from the filter cap on the opposite side to remove the air. Apply 1,800 psi to 2,000 psi pressure for the injector. No leakage permitted with the body seal filter cap of the gasket body of the plugs and between the sprayer and the tip of the injector nuts. Alright, injectors should be qualified to pressure holding tested by timing the interval drop in the pressure of 2,000 psi to 1,500 psi. The interval is less than 20 seconds or 30 seconds new or recondition. Repeat the test with the be closed with the pressure shutoff valve on the test stand immediately after establishing 2,000 psi pressure. They ensure the leak downtime does not be affected by the possible leak of the test and stand itself. If the time interval of the pressure drop is 2,000 psi to 1,500 psi is still less than 20 seconds used or 30 seconds new, or recondition the injector should be rejected. And to relieve the pressure before removing the injector from the test stand, wrap the cloth around the injector fuel line connections and back off the clamp wrench in figure 11.7. Or racking the freeness test. The rack engages the small pinion with the injector plunger with the serve of the rotate with the plunger with respect to 2 ports for the injector bushing, which regulates the amount of fuel injected with each for the stroke with the plunger binding with the rack will generally cause damaged gear teeth with the scored plunger bushing and the gouging of the rack itself with the bolting binding of the rack, which may cause sluggish or erratic speed with the change of the overspeed trip action. To be considered satisfactory, the rack must fall in and out through the full travel on its own weight with the injector held and horizontally rotated by the axis. Alright, binding plunger test. The failure with the injector plunger to move up and down freely indicates the scoring with the plunger and bushing, or where broken spring with the riding with the plunger will cause the erratic cylinder firing in an extreme case of the overspeed trip action. Placing injector test stand, but do not test the fuel line. Place the rack in the full fuel position and pull the fuel out of the injector with the injector popping lever, figure 11.7. When all the fuel has been removed, depress the injector plunger to full extent of the travel. Slowly release the popping lever. Simultaneously move the injector rapidly in and out through the full travel. Replacing injector filters. Injector filters should not be distributed to remove the exempt during the injector reconditioning when all parts are completely washed or in event with a fuel stoppage for the injector. Alright, storing injectors. Injectors are not to be within considerable length of time. They should be protected against rust and using stable, non-corrosive straight run of the petroleum distillate kerosene volatility range. It also has recommended the injectors be tested using the oil. If this is done, retreatment will be taken care of at the time of the injector test. A treatment of the injector should be stored in the protective cleaner until needed. The container should accommodate the injector holding the rack, similar to shown in Figure 11.8. Figure 11.8 shows the injector holding rack, injector linkage. Description of the injector linkage in Figure 11.9. Consider the mechanical arrangement between the governor and the injector, permitting all the injector rack positions to be changed simultaneously with the governor terminal. Shaft is rotated. Two injector control rods connect with the lever of the governor terminal shaft with the injector control shaft. Injector control shaft, the one of each of the bank, extend with the length of the cylinder bank with under the cylinder head with the head cover of the frame. The cylinder location lever is pinned with the control shaft. Adjusting link connects with the control shaft lever with the injector control lever mounted with the cylinder head, one end of which is straddled to the ball at the end of the injector rack. Show the adjusting link, the adjusting nut, the lock nut, the injector rack, and the injector control shaft. Figure 11.9 shows the injector linkage on the injector control rod, injector control shaft, and injector control lever. Maintenance. Before attempting to set the injector racks, all racks of linkage should be checked for binding, striking, or wear of the wood affect the operation. Or setting injector racks. Injector racks should be set with the engine operating temperature if the racks are set within the engine. It is not operating temperature set, it should be the recheck for the operating temperature reach with the engine temperature increase with the right bank with the rack with the length showing with the left bank of the rack increases. The left bank is significant, but the chain with the right bank may be shortened the racks beyond the 1/64th of an inch tolerance. Every time a governor installed with the injector rack, the setting should be checked for the manufacturer tolerance for the governor in mounting into bolt holes. The position of the governor relationship with the injector line linkage can be changed from the rack setting. They set the injector rack on the engine valves and spin off the injector linkage setting jack 1110. 11 tack into the injector rack position. Show the injector linkage setting jack. Adjusting setting jack until the pointer of the governor aligns with the governor terminal shaft at a scale of 1 inch mark. Using the injector rocker gauge on Figure 11.11 to set the rack, the setting rating of marks on the gauge. The rack setting with the gauge is 8 to 1. Multiplying the gauge indicates 1/64th of an inch tolerance. Marks at 1/8 of an inch each side of the center mark of the gauge scale. It is important that the proper rack gauge be used in previous model with the rack gauge as well. The measurement of the rack length with the body of the injector instead of the face for the calibration slide on the correct gauge for the setting with the injector with the calibration slides can be readily identified by the setting location between button on the front face for the gauge. For the gauge can be used for all injectors. Figure 11 shows the injector rack gauge shows the S end, L end, and setting range in the middle and the center mark in the gauge scale at the L end. Place the gauge over the injector rack, hold the gauge firmly against the face for the calibration slide of the injector. Figure 11.12. Check with the gauge pointer if the pointer is in the S or the short or S end of the gauge scale outside of the setting range. Rack is not extended far enough at the end of the injector. Loosen the lock nut with the adjusting link of the Figure 11.9. Turn the adjusting nut to the link until the pointer is on the L or long end of the scale. Reverse pointer traveled until there's within the scale setting range. Hold the adjusting nut, tighten the lock nut. The reason for exceeding the setting range with the make the adjustment is so that the L setting racks of the backlash will take up in the same direction. Figure 11.12 shows the injector rack gauge application. Show the calibration side and the magnification, injector gauge side and the magnification, and the pointer. Or when a pointer is on the long end of the scale, set the pointer with the setting range. The accuracy of the injector rack gauge can be checked with inserting the master block with the gauge body with the pointer. Should be aligned with the center of the mark scale. Fuel and filter. The engine mounted with the fuel filter, Figure 11.13, is located to the right of the front engine. The two side glasses are provided on the top of the filter housing to provide a very visual indication of the condition of the fuel system. Flow diagram of the Figure 11.14 indicates the fuel filter. 11.13 shows the fuel filter. Return fuel sight glass glass normally full, filter elements, and bypass sight glass normally empty. A fuel returning from the injector passed through the return fuel sight glass near the engine, return with the fuel tank. The under normal operation glasses and fuel full of fuel. 10 psi relief valve and then inlet to the return fuel sight glass establishes fuel back on the pressure injector and provides operation. Figure 11.14 shows the fuel flow through the filter. You have it goes from the return to the manifold to the relief valve to 10 psi with the return sight gauge and then drain back to the fuel tank. The fuel inline goes to the bypass sight gauge and also go at 60 psi and then section drain to the fuel tank. The fuel inline goes between the filter elements and the filter assembly to the engine manifold and back to the fuel tank. Air gas and fuel system wallpaper with the return fuel sight glass with the bubble that entering the fuel and the place with the suction line may cover the engine with the misfire at the top of the bubble of the return fuel sight glass within the fuel pump with the round with the engine stop indicates the entering of the suction side with the fuel pump. The bubbles appear only when the engine is running. Indicates leaky valve with the injectors, fuel injectors aligned with the combustion gas into the fuel. Little or no fuel within the return line sight glass by the pass with the sight with the glass empty indicates the insufficient fuel supply of the engine. Under normal operation, bypass sight glass and farther with the engine should be empty with the fuel. As for the elements, filter become dirty. The fuel pressure for the filter will increase the fuel pressure in the element housing approximately 60 psi. The relief valve under the gas will open and fuel filter entering the fuel bypass sight glass will then return to the fuel tank starving the engine. The disposable filter elements are mounted directly with the filter body with the elements consist of the pleated paper, the round with the perforated metal tube. This causes in this case, the enamel steel shell capable of withstanding internal pressures at 150 psi. A neoprene gasket attached to the top of each of the elements ensures sealing. Maintenance. The filter element should be removed. The new ones should install the intervals specified in the schedule of the maintenance program. At the time of the element replacement, the filter body sight glass should be cleaned. Shut down the engine with the engine fuel supply. Unscrew the elements using the strap wrench. If necessary, discard them. Apply the firm oil over the oil of the gasket new element, applying the element to the filter body. High tight and hand tighten until the gasket contacts the filter body with the tighten 1/2 turn. Check the condition with the sight glass and the clean, and further check for leaks for the engine is started. Or your equipment list. You have the injector timing gauge, injector pry bar, plastic spray cup, the extra U with the injector test stand, oil injector storage, rust prevention 50-gallon drum, injector rack gauge, injector holding rack, injector leak and linkage setting, jack and injector test stand complete. And that takes care of part 11, fuel system.